I want to talk tonight about the different aspects of what we've been going through in the last 3 weeks in Simchas Torah. And I have to say, it's very, very traumatic, especially in Eretz Yisrael. The way that these events unfold is that people take a long time to process. And I don't think we've really gone through the processing yet. It'll take time. But one of the things that we need to process is what kind of people our enemies are. And that's one of the most difficult parts of this whole ordeal, is to come to terms with something that we hate to come to terms with because we're Jews. And Jews stand for goodness, they stand for justice, they stand for tikkun olam, rectifying the world, refining it. And Jews stand for geula, which means redemption. And what we mean by redemption is that the world itself, the world we see here, this house, everything that we see ourselves, can be godly. And Hashem can appear, can have a dira b'tachtonim, as we call it, a dwelling place below. And that means that goodness prevails over everything. And goodwill, as the Goyim like to call it. It's a feeling that we are all brothers, that we are all connected, that we're all responsible for one another. And this has been the program of Yiddishkeit since Avram Avinu. This has been the goal. It's so central a goal that every day we daven 3 times a day, Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avram. Blessed are you, Hashem, who shields Abraham. What do we mean who shields Abraham? Abraham hasn't been here for a while. What do we mean he needs a shield? What we mean is exactly what Hashem said to Avram, Anuchi Magen Lecha Harbe Me'od. I am shielding your reward greatly, meaning, Avram, do not fret, do not be afraid of the long path that you have to take. In the end, your vision of the world will come to fruition. And what was Avram's vision of the world? 2 things, they're related to one another. Avram is called Avram Oavi, Avram who loves me, the love of Hashem, the love of man. And the notion, Echad Haya Avraham, Avram was one. We call him one because he taught the world the faith in one God. What do we mean by one God? What we mean is, and this is very difficult, is that all the things that we see as separate, as different, they are actually at their root connected to one thing. They all come from one thing. And not just at their root, but this is Avram's vision, what he saw the world was capable of, that it will be revealed that everything in this world is one. That is Avram's great contribution to the world. It's why he is the first patriarch. It's why he is the one whose reward has to be shielded, Magen Avraham, that Hashem, we say this 3 times a day because we know that this is the purpose of life. And there are ups and downs on the way there. And the most difficult down that we have is to contend with pure evil. Because pure evil has one goal in mind. It wants to prove to us that Hashem is not one. Meaning, it wants us to lose faith. Faith in the oneness of reality. Meaning faith in the ability of the world to reach a state in which there is goodness and justice and so on for everyone. This redemption is what it will fight with all its force. It's not interested in territory, it's not interested in resources, it's not interested in anything you can give it. It's interested in your faith. That's what it wants. And it will create chaos and confusion and terror, whatever serves its purpose to put, in the language of the Baal Shem Tov, to put doubt in our minds. And that pure evil has a name in the Torah. It's called Amalek. Amalek used to be a nation, but like everything in the Torah doesn't necessarily look at things just as historical objects or events that occurred. It looks at it as an archetype. And Amalek is an archetype of this pure evil. That's what it is. In our generation, there is no Amalek. No one knows who Amalek is. Nobody really cares. They're gone. A long time ago, there was a king of Aram whose name was Sancheriv, and he destroyed all the ancient nations. He confused them, as we say. He took people from here to there, and so on. And there's no pedigrees anymore of these nations. Nobody knows who they are. They don't exist anymore. But the idea continues to exist. The archetype of what Amalek is continues to exist. Now, to deal with Amalek, we have this interesting mitzvah that appears twice in the Torah. And the mitzvah says that you should eradicate Amalek. Except, in the first time that it says you shall eradicate Amalek, it's not you shall, it says Hashem shall. Hashem will do this. That's in Parsha, at the end of Parshas B'Shalach, in the book of Shmos and Exodus. The second time, in Parshas Kiteitzei, in Deuteronomy, there it says, Machotim chet zecher Amalek. You shall eradicate his existence. What does it mean? Why is it twice? The Lubavitcher Rebbe has a beautiful sikha on this, and he deals with this question of why is it that once it says that Hashem will do it, the other time it commands us to do it. And he says, like many things in the world, when it comes to eradicating evil, we can only eradicate the particular incarnation of this archetype in our generation. We can only deal with where it sprouts out and shows itself openly in our generation. But to eradicate what's called the memory of Amalek, the Rebbe explains that this means that there won't anymore be any thought by anyone in the world, not now, not in the future, to create this chaos, to create this confusion, to create this death, to destroy the world. That is in the hands of Hashem. That we cannot ensure by ourselves. We don't have a way of getting into people's minds and somehow controlling them. That we can't do. The most we can do is, as it were, to fight Amalek in our generation. Now again, for most people, and for most generations, Amalek was not a certain people. It's not a certain nation. In fact, even its name implies that it cuts off the head. What does it mean that it cuts off the head? It means that it is like a leech that grows on nations and takes off their head, meaning takes off their way of thinking, their natural way of being, and it substitutes its own demented thoughts and thinking for what that nation had. Most of the time when we think about Amalek, when do we think about it? Shabbos before Purim, Shabbat Zachor. And then we read it, and everybody taps with their feet. It's very nice. And then a few days later, a day, 2, 3, whatever it is, that week, we celebrate Purim. So what's our association with Amalek? It's Purim. It's something that has to do with a lot of joy and merriment and the world becoming upside down. Really, the whole idea of the world becoming upside down is exactly what they want. They want to turn the world upside down. We take it and we make it into a joke. It's okay. It's very nice. But from time to time, every so often, every so many generations, it's not a joke anymore. It becomes a reality. It becomes something that we have to contend with, something that we have to deal with. So what I want to say first of all is that we usually understand mitzvos, a commandment in the Torah, is coming to tell us what to do. In the case of eradicating Amalek, annihilating them, however they appear in whatever generation, the Torah is not just commanding us to do something. It's giving us what I would call a moral license. And I want to explain what I mean by these words, moral license. Jews, like we said, every single Jew, when you sort of squeeze their essence out, what you'll get after everything is a true need, an existential need to fix the world. For every one of us, it comes out maybe in a different way, but we care. And we're always looking for ways to salvage. We're always looking for ways to save. We're always looking for ways to separate the evil out and retain the good. Like Avram in our parsha, when he is told that Hashem is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, so he comes and says, but you have to separate out. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. The one who does justice for all the land won't do justice. Ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha. Will you destroy the righteous with the evil? That's Jewish thinking. And it's almost impossible for us to think otherwise. That's why the Torah has to give us a mitzvah, which I said is not just a mitzvah, it's a moral license. Because there are things where you can't do that. There is pure evil in the world, and its only rectification, the only way to deal with it, is to eradicate it completely, without any regard. It doesn't matter how old he is, or how young he is, a woman or a child, it doesn't matter at all. You first of all have to have a moral license to do what needs to be done. Now, does this mean that when you're contending with a nation that's become Amalek, that you have to literally destroy them all? No, not necessarily. The war with Amalek is like the war with any nation. You first of all ask them to surrender before you touch them. And if they're willing to surrender, you don't have to fight them. It doesn't say that you shouldn't. It just says you don't have to. The war with Amalek is the war with like any other war that we've had. We are expected to leave a way for people to escape if they don't want to fight us. We are expected to do that. We don't have to. These things are expectations. They're not yaregu bal yavo. It's not that if you didn't do this, then you've done a terrible sin. No, it depends on the circumstances. But the idea is that you have to be told that you have the moral license to do whatever is needed to ensure that the world is not destroyed by these ideas. And I happened to watch a TV today. I was in a hotel meeting someone, and I saw that someone from Israel said that this is a war for civilization. And that's exactly what it is. It's a war for civilization, exactly like World War II was. At some point in 1933, the Allies realized that there could not be any treaty, any what they call ceasefire with Germany. It wouldn't work. And so they decided in 1933, I don't remember the name of the meeting that they had, but it was a particular moment that they said they would only accept one thing: unconditional surrender. Nothing less. Because anything less will mean the destruction of the world, the destruction of civilization. They understood this because they understood suddenly, at some point, they realized that they were not out to conquer the world. They weren't out to gain resources. They weren't out to become wealthy. They weren't looking for anything that a normal, reasonable human being can even understand. They were interested in one thing, which is destroying the world. And when you have an enemy like that, they took for themselves, they didn't call him Amalek or not, or maybe they consulted someone who we don't know, but they took it for themselves from a normal, logical, reasonable mindset that says that they have to be eradicated. There's no other option. So the non-Jews, they don't have this essence that we have, that everything should be to fix the world, to rectify it. So they didn't have a big issue with it. I'm not saying they didn't have any issue of deciding this decision, making this decision, but they didn't have much of an issue. And Jews have an issue. And we have to know that all the things that we're angry at, because the army doesn't do enough, and it's like this, and it's like that, it doesn't come from a bad place. It comes from the sense that a Jew always has, that he's here to rectify the world. He's here to fix the world. And it's difficult for us to take the initiative to do what needs to be done. And that's why this mitzvah is in the Torah. And Hashem is telling us, look, I'm telling you that in the end, the end of this idea is to be destroyed. It will disappear from the world. There will come a time when people will not fight each other. There will be no more war, as Isaiah says. But on the road to that, you have to be willing to do what needs to be done. You have to be willing to do it. And for this reason, Hashem is commanding us this mitzvah, which again is a very difficult mitzvah for most people to understand most days of the year, most generations even. And then comes a time when you understand it. And you understand it not as an imperative in the sense of it's telling you to go make war. It's telling you the only way to meet what's been forced on you is with total and utter license to eradicate. To come to nothing but nothing less than a total, complete, unconditional surrender. Nothing else will do. Because otherwise, you will be facing this again and again and again, and you will be destroyed. Civilization will be destroyed by these ideas because what we see now is that they are infectious. You thought maybe it's only in one place, then you suddenly see it somewhere else. And then you see it in Europe, and then you see it in the United States. You simply see it. It's like a virus. It spreads. Why are some people more susceptible to it than others? That's a whole different discussion. We can discuss about the connection between Iran and Germany, and why those two societies are susceptible to this virus. It doesn't mean that every single Iranian is sick with it, but there's enough of them, and the leadership there is sick with it, in the same way that the German leadership was sick with it. And there is only one way to fight it, and once this virus spreads, there's only one way to fight it. So that's the first point that I'd like to make. It's a general point, but now I'd like to look a little bit more in detail at one of the most important encounters that we have with Amalek in the Bible. And we're going to look at the 30th chapter of 1 Samuel, of Shmuel Aleph. And a little bit of background on this chapter. This chapter, like all of Shmuel, is basically the story of David, the story of King David. In this section of the story, King David is in between having been discovered and becoming king. He was discovered by Shmuel, by Samuel. He was anointed as a king already. And the moment that happened, Shaul Amalek, who was the king at the time, turned against David. He realized in some sense, even though he may not have known that he was anointed, but he realized that he was there to replace him. And as much as he was his greatest hero, his greatest warrior, he was the one who fought against Goliath and won, he was also his, one would say, muse. He was the one who gave him inspiration. He played for him. He was the great poet who gave Saul some solace from his psychological problems. Not only that, he was his son-in-law, or at least destined to be. And in spite of all these things, something strikes Saul in his head, and he decides that he wants to kill David. Every time he sees him, he inevitably gets angry, besides himself, can't control himself, and wants to kill David. At some point, David has no choice, and he runs away from Givah, which is where Shaul's kingdom, seat of his kingdom was, and he runs down to the southern part of the tribe of Judah, which is called the Negev, the southern part of Eretz Yisrael. And he collects around him, in a matter of a few months, this is all a couple of years, the whole story, within a matter of a few months, he collects around him 400 bitter men, is how they're described. People who feel hurt by society, they don't belong in society, and they feel that they have to run away from society. And they collect around him in the desert, in this wilderness, which is very, very, the thing to know about is very, very tough terrain. It's full of ravines and high mountains. It's very hard to walk through it. You're constantly going up and down and up and down. And they live there for a time. At some point, Shaul continues to pursue David. He continues to look for him. He wants to kill him. So David finds a way to escape him. He goes from the difficult wilderness down to the flatlands towards the Mediterranean Sea. And there live the Philistines. And David, in a very interesting turn of events, and turn of fate even, he befriends the Philistines, specifically Achish, the king of Gat, one of the 5 great Philistine cities. The Philistines are not from Eretz Yisrael, they're not Canaanites. They came from Ham, from Africa, via some Mediterranean islands. They're called Plishtim, Philistines, because they take over lands that are not there. They're squatters. They are a nation that has no home. And David becomes Achish's warrior. He befriends him, and Achish is willing to tolerate David because he knows that Saul is pursuing him. I don't know if he knew the details, why Saul is pursuing him, because David was anointed to be a king. Probably nobody told Achish, he didn't know this, and it didn't matter. But the enemy of my enemies is my friend. So he gets along with him for a while. And David is there for a few months in Gat. He's become so connected to Achish that when the time comes, the 5 kings of the Philistines decide they're going to make war on the Israelites. And so they're going to convene. And Achish says to David, why don't you come with me? And David says, I believe it was David who said, they won't accept me. He says, no, but you've already proven yourself to be loyal to me, and you're the enemy of Saul. They'll take you. So David agrees to go. We know that David's plan was to join the war against the Israelites and to backstab the Philistines, to be what's called the 5th column. So he would be, as it were, fighting alongside the Philistines behind their lines and attack them at the right moment to destroy them so they wouldn't be able to win the war against his fellow Jews. To go out to war at that time meant that you had to do something with your women folk and your children. So Achish says to David, I'll give you a town called Siklag, and I want you to put your wives and the wives of, now he has 600 men with him already, he's not just at 400, he's gone up to 600, and the wives and children of all your men, and when we come back victorious, you'll take them out of that town. So David agrees, of course, and everybody, these 600 men, they put their wives and children in this town called Siklag. What ends up happening? David goes with Achish up to the big meeting of all the Philistine kings, and they sense that something is wrong. They tell Achish, we don't trust him. They realize that he might be plotting against them, and Achish has no choice. In order to prevent them from killing David on the spot, he sends David away. And David leaves. So David was altogether 3 days in going up to the meeting of the Philistines, and then he comes back to Tiklag to pick up his wives, he had 2 wives then, and his children and of his men. And that's where we meet chapter 30 in 1 Samuel. What happened then? And it was when David and his men came to Tziklag, that on the third day, meaning they had gone and come back. On the third day, before they got back, the Amalekites had raided the south and Tziklag. There was an Amalekite troop from the original nation. Here we're talking about the original nation. And what did they do? They raided the southern part of Judah, and amongst other places, they raided Tziklag. And they had smote Tziklag and burned it with fire. They destroyed this town. And they had captured the women who were therein, but they slew no one, neither big nor small, but led them away and went on their way. So they took, I don't know how many people, all hostages. And back then hostages were not, in order to, and especially with Amalek, there was no bartering or anything like that. You took women and children, the women would serve you, and the children would be brought up as your own children, and that's how ancient times were. That's how things, Baruch Hashem, since then, supposedly we're more civilized. Supposedly. But you see that Amalek is not more civilized today. All the same. And David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burnt with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been captured. And David and all the people who were there with him raised their voice and wept until they had no strength to weep. And David's two wives were captured, Achinoam the Israelite, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And David was in dire straits, for the people spoke of stoning him. His 600 men wanted to stone him there. We'll talk about why in a second. I'm going to read the whole story, and then we'll get back to it. For the soul of all the people was grieved, each man concerning his sons and concerning his daughters. But David strengthened himself in Neviah his God, and David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Achimelech, bring to me now the ephod. And Abiathar brought the ephod near to David, and David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop of Amalekites? Will I overtake them? And he said to him, pursue, for you shall overtake and you shall rescue. And David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, name of a brook or ravine, and those who were left behind stayed. What happened? The 600 men, we said there were 400 and then 200 more joined. The 400 who were bitter men were very strong, and they pursued for a day and a night without stopping. Think about running for a day and a night. There are marathons like that. They do 100-kilometer marathons. It's pretty much what they used to do. But not everybody could keep up. The 200 new men got stuck at this ravine. They stayed on the other side. They didn't have the strength to go up and down. And they stayed and they guarded the equipment, the food, whatever they had with them. And the 400 men continued. And there remained 200 men who refrained from crossing the brook Besor. And they found an Egyptian man in the field and brought him to David. And they gave him bread and he ate, and they gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. When he had eaten, his spirit returned to him, for he had eaten no bread, nor drunk any water 3 days and 3 nights. So they find this Egyptian boy, and obviously he might have intelligence, he might know something. And David said to him, to whom do you belong, and from where are you? And he said, I'm an Egyptian boy, a slave of an Amalekite man, and my master left me for 3 days ago. I fell sick. So he thought he was going to die. He left him in the field, and that was it. We made a raid, and now he tells them what they did. We made a raid upon the south of the Kreti. Here they call him Cheres. I didn't recognize the word. So it's a part of the Judean people, and upon that which belongs to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, there's a city called Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, will you bring me down to this troop? Meaning, will you show me where they are? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not put me to death, and they will not deliver me into my master's hand, and I shall bring you down to this troop. And he brought him down, and behold, the Amalekites, were scattered over the entire landscape, eating and drinking and dancing because of all the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Notice that they attacked Philistines as well. There was no difference for the Amalekites. Like we said, they're not necessarily the same thing as Philistines. There's something that's separate, and they attack everything. And David smote them from evening until evening to their morrow, and no man of them escaped except 400 young men who rode out on camels and fled. Like we said, even when you fight the Amalekites, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to eradicate everyone. It could be that you've proved your point, you finished what you need to do. He freed his wives, his children, all the other men's wives and children. If there were 400 who ran away, they ran away. They're not a threat anymore. And David rescued all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives, and there was nothing missing to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, nor anything which they had taken to themselves. David recovered everything. Okay. After all this, David takes the spoils, the sheep, the cattle. Why doesn't he destroy the sheep and the cattle? One of the things that the Torah says is you have to destroy their sheep and cattle. Because he's not a king. From here we learn that only a king is required, that whomever he has decided is Amalek and he needs to destroy, he also needs to destroy anything alive, any living creature that they have. This is a whole topic in and of itself, why we see it this way, but think about it like this, that if this is a virus, if it's a type of mind virus, it attacks living things. And living things, even the animals can carry this virus, even though the animals themselves won't be affected by it. But we know that there are viruses that are carried by animals. So it's almost like, I'm not saying that the Torah is telling us about a virus. I'm trying to think about it, that something that's alive carries the same problem as the people. And they led before those cattle and said, "This is David's spoil." And David came to the 200 men who had refrained from going after David, and they had stationed them at the brook Besor, and they came out towards David and toward the people who were with him. And David approached those 200 men and greeted them. Then every evil and unscrupulous man of the men who had gone with David spoke up and said, "Since they, the 200, did not go with me, they didn't come, they didn't have the strength to continue pursuing, let us not give them of the spoil which we have rescued. But each man, his wife, and his children, let them lead them away and depart. Give them only back their women and children. But they don't get from the spoils." Why? Because they didn't take part in the war. And David said, "Do not do so, my brethren. With that which the Lord has given us, and he guarded us and delivered the troop which came upon us into our hand. And who will listen to you concerning this matter? For as the share of him who goes down into battle, so is the share of him who stays with the luggage," meaning the equipment, "they shall share alike." And it was from that day on that he made it a statute, a halacha, and an ordinance for Israel until this day. That what? That it doesn't matter if you were a infantry soldier, it doesn't matter if you were a pilot, it doesn't matter if you were in logistics. Everybody has equal share in the victory. It's all the same. Okay, so this is basically the story. What I'd like to do now is to use the time we have remaining to analyze the story a little bit, to understand how you're supposed to fight a war. This is one of the best blueprints for how somebody fights. The first thing that happens, which is even strange, is that they begin to weep or cry out in Hebrew until they have no more strength to cry. Doesn't sound like a big group of warriors. Somebody captured your women and your children, and you have time to sit down and cry and weep instead of pursuing right away? Why is this? What kind of a strategy is this? Why do they do this? And all the more so that at the end of this, they want to stone David. How did they get to that? One has to know that in every process of change, of tshuva, there are 3 stages. And we know them as submission, separation, and sweetening from the Baal Shem Tov. First, a sense of submission before Hashem. Then a sense of separating the darkness out of yourself and leaving only your connection to God. And finally, the sweetening, which is the final act, which finishes the transformation that you go through in tshuva. In this case, and in any case that a person faces a calamity, the first thing to do is submission before Hashem. If you don't do that stage, then nothing further will happen. You'll basically be fighting the air. You won't be able to change anything. Why is this? Because when something negative happens to a Jew, the first understanding is, I did something wrong. There is justice in the world. There is yesh din ve'yesh dayan. There is a master to the world. And if something happened to me, even if I don't understand, I don't think I'm guilty of anything. Say Chazal, when Yisurim come to a person, when some kind of suffering comes to a person, the first thing he needs to do, yepeshpesh b'masav. The first thing he needs to do is he needs to look at his actions and think what's wrong. And if he can't find what's wrong, he has to cry out to Hashem to show him. To sit and cry until you have no more strength is the first process, it's the first stage of doing tshuva. And you cannot win a war, and you cannot turn the dial back unless you first do the tshuva, unless you first submit to Hashem. There's no point. We saw things like this. For instance, after the sin of the spies, some of the nations said, okay, we're going to do tshuva. We're going to conquer the land anyway. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Hashem's not with you. Why is Hashem not with you? Because you have no submission. What did Hashem just tell you? That the submission is now that you're going to have to spend your lifetime in the wilderness. You won't go into the land of Israel, and only your descendants will. If you're not willing to submit, what good is the fact that you're going to go to war? And indeed, they're smitten by who? By the Amalekites. The Canaani, they're called the Canaani, they're Amalekites. That's the first stage in any kind of transmutation that you can do in yourself. You have to first of all see what's wrong with me. How did I come to this state? What was the conclusion after they cried until they couldn't cry anymore, until they submitted before Hashem? Some of them came to the conclusion, right or wrong, that David was to blame. That's not a very good way to do submission. To blame someone else is not the way to do this. But it happens to people. And some of them concluded, or all of them even concluded, that it was all David's fault. Why David's fault? Why did you take us on this expedition, on this adventure, on this machination against the Philistines? Why not just fight them? What's this whole thing of becoming a fifth column, of joining them and tricking them and this and that? How would we say this today? Of course you meant well. Of course you wanted to save the Jewish people. But don't you know that you don't make these types of deals? Don't you know that in the end these things will backfire? I can't think of anything more relevant to today. For 30 years, I would like to hope that out of good intention, the people that still control the state of Israel, who are all of a very certain mindset, have been trying to make deals with death. And you can't make deals with Amalek. You simply can't. Okay, you didn't know until now it's Amalek. How could you not know? Every time they attack us, it's very clear that it's Amalek. They're not doing it for any reason, because we're willing to give the... if they would just be like Swiss, they would have everything they wanted. So it's clearly not about land, it's not about resources, it's not about pride even. The easiest thing in the thing is to get a Jew to agree. Because a Jew always wants to agree. He always wants peace. It's the first thing on his mind, always. And when he wakes up in the morning, and when he goes to sleep at night. So you didn't know until now that they're Amalek. You didn't know until now that they're full of this hatred towards civilization, towards goodness, towards God. So they came up with this conclusion that David's to blame. We followed you, David, into this whole ordeal. It's because of you that we put our wives and children unprotected, and that's how we got here. And David, I don't know if it means that he did tshuva, or whether he did something that impressed upon them that he was not a weak person who was looking to do the easy thing. It says he strengthened himself in Hashem. And they were convinced again that this is the leader that they want to follow. That was the first stage, the tshuva, the submission. The second stage was that David puts on the ephod. He calls Evyatar and he asks for the ephod. What this ephod is, there are different opinions. Chazal say that it was the Urim and Tumim. Evyatar was a priest in Nov. He was the only person to survive the destruction of the city of Nov. And he took with him the Urim and Tumim, meaning the breastplate of the high priest. And you could use it to ask questions of God if you had prophecy. Another option is, and this is in some ways more easy, that the ephod was also, even it could be that it's both things, a garment that novice prophets would wear. And there's also a very interesting sikha from the Rebbe about this, about what this exactly was. A novice prophet is something that David was. King David was a novice prophet. Was he a full prophet or only half a prophet? There's a lot of discussion about this. We'll leave it at that. And he does, whether it's with a breastplate or with this ephod, with this vest that you put on yourself, he asks God, should I pursue? He asks God, what should I do? What is that? That's the stage of separation. Separation means that I have to remove all my ulterior motives, and I have to, my material motives, my cravings, my love even, for the material world. And I have to ask my godly self, my divine soul, what is the right thing to do? That's what separation basically is. It's a person identifying with their godly soul. And when they identify with their godly soul and they ask it, you, my godly soul, what is your interest in the world? That is called separating the evil out of myself. We all have a type of, it's not pure evil, it's just a tendency towards the material world that has to be removed, not taken into consideration, and you have to ask purely what is the right thing to do as far as godliness is concerned. In their time, they had an instrument called a breastplate, or they had an ephod, and they could do this in a much more, we'll call it, practical manner. They had a way of actually doing this. We do this today psychologically. We do it in ourselves. When we do separation, we have to discount, we have to subtract out of our consideration, out of our cheshbon, like how we're going to calculate what's the right thing to do. We have to subtract everything that has to do with the animal soul. And we have to leave ourselves only with the divine soul, with our heart, with our higher self, with our connection to God. And ask there, what is the right thing to do? And so David receives the answer, pursue. Pursue, and you will bring them back alive. Now this is an amazing thing. Why would you think that he would be able to bring them back alive? For that you need a divine inspiration to know that this is what's going to happen. That you can pursue, it's time to pursue, you will destroy them, and no one will be hurt. That happens when you do this separation. It could be that you'll do the separation and it tells you something else, and it tells you pursue, but you won't be able to bring them back alive. That could also be. But in this case, they saw in themselves, David saw in himself, he would both pursue and be able to bring all the women and children back alive. And then they do this. And that's the end of the separation. That you actually act out what your divine soul tells you. But that's not the last stage. The last stage is the sweetening. What does the sweetening mean? Sweetening means that we started out this whole problem because we were doing something wrong. It's not enough just to reverse the events. It's not enough to just free the women and children. It's not enough to beat the Amalekites. It's not enough. Why is it not enough? Because the whole problem started because there was something wrong with your considerations. There was something wrong in your attitude. That was why you did submission. You did tshuva. Tshuva, says the Baal Shem Tov, has to end with a sweetening, with the rectification of the initial conditions that brought about the whole problem. What does David see? He sees it. He sees in his people. There are those who want to claim the victory only for themselves, and it doesn't belong to the others. There's no unity. It says in the end, what brought on this whole thing? The lack of unity. The lack of connection between the Jews themselves. Again, so relevant to our time. And he solves that. He sweetens the whole situation by making a new halacha. And about this Chazal say, the halachak moto bekol makom, that David always knows what to do, and whatever he sets as the halacha became the ruling, that even though this was already done twice, it was never said as a halacha. It was done in last week's parsha with Avraham, that he shared the spoils between everyone who had gone with him, those who had pursued, and even those who were left behind. It again happens in the war with Midian by Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is the third time. And this time it becomes halacha. And the halacha here is that everyone is together. Everybody contributed. Everybody has a part. And I can't continue to lead the people. This is how David is apparently different. He's a different type of leader. He's one who says, I have to represent everyone. Everyone has to feel that I am fair to them, that I am with them, that I hear them. That's the sweetening. So what we saw here are these three stages. And this is pertinent to today. To fight this war with Amalek, first of all, to use the moral license that Hashem has given us to eradicate them, we have to have, first of all, a sense of tshuva. We need to do tshuva about what was wrong. What was wrong before, it's not a big secret. In any case, if it was a secret to anyone, so Rav Ginsburg was speaking about it the last 2 weeks, clearly the sense, and I have to say, I myself felt that this past year was the worst year of my life in Eretz Yisrael. Literally, the worst year that I've never felt anything like this. The level of hatred, the level of just simply, it looked like it was already not a joke. It was very close to it. That we were not people on the street. These professors were talking about that the only way out is a civil war. This is the only way to solve the kera, the tear in society. We're talking about this seriously. This is what's going to come. And you felt it every single day, that everything you've built here, everything we've done here, is now questionable. We don't know if it will last. That was the feeling. And so, if somebody somehow didn't figure this out, that's what tshuva has to be done on that. And it's usually the way that only the people who know about tshuva do tshuva. It's unfortunate. There's a whole part of our society, of our brothers and sisters that don't understand the concept of tshuva. And they certainly don't know that you have to do tshuva in order to win a war. So have they done tshuva now? Have they decided? The soldiers for sure have. But is the society now close-knit and all the tears are mended? I don't know. The second thing is that you also have to come and say that I have a moral license to go and destroy them, and that I do this not as a vengeance. It's one of the most difficult things to do correctly. But we do this because we want the world to be a good place. That's all it is. Whether somebody has a personal vendetta or feels anger or whatever, this comes out in war. There's always how that plays out. But the real reason, and this needs to be explained to the world, is it's not coming from, which is terrible. You hear this on the news all the time. We're going to get them because of, no. The message is, and thankfully it's beginning to come out, is that this is what the civilized world has to do. And you don't have a moral justification, you don't have a moral license because you signed something called the Geneva Accords. Very nice for you. We have a Torah. And the Torah gives us the moral license to do this, and to do it properly, and so that the name of Amalek is eradicated. Again, we can't stop someone else in some other part of the world of coming up with the same ideas. That Hashem has to do, but we have to do our part. And finally, after all this is done and finished, there has to come a time of sweeping. There has to come, as David did here, a time of appointing a leader who is able to see everyone. A leader who sees, as Joshua was, someone who understands the spirit, the inner needs, the inner drives of everyone, and that everyone feels that they find their voice represented in this leadership. And this is the time to appoint a king. This is a time to look for someone. A king is something that people are afraid of. So we have other words for it. There's 13 different synonyms for king in Hebrew. We can use one of them. Nasi. Nasi is very nice. They have that in the United States, called the president. Call it the president of Israel. It's very nice. You can have all kinds of Otzer. 13 different words you can choose from. But it's time to have this type of leadership. And hopefully, what I really hope for, that somehow, at the end of all that is happening here, we'll see Amalek eradicated, and no one in the world wanting to mimic these actions again, ever. Hashem will do his part and remove it from the world, and that we, ourselves, will decide to appoint a king. And if we do that, then all of this is what we started with. It shows that Hashem really is one. That even these calamities, even these tragedies, they are a step in the direction of making the world one, and making the world just, and making the world good. And it was not for nothing that we went through all of this.